is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I don't know how many of you got caught in that freak storm Wednesday night. I did. I came to church about 5:30 and there was nothing. When I left about 8, a little after 8, the hill going up to Bigelow Gulch to where the Nom Nom is was 8 inches of snow. I had to drop into 4-wheel drive to even get up the hill, and it was like, what? Beautiful on the other side, big 3-inch snowflakes just drifting down, just making it pretty, but it was crazy. But you never know. It's the first time I've seen that around here. Iceland, I went in to get the kids from school because it was snowing really bad, and I came out, and I kid you not, I had about almost a 2.5, 3 foot snowdrift behind my Jeep in 30 minutes. So, anyway, this morning we are going to be starting off a new series, and we'll get into that more later. The leader of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, identified Jewish people as enemies of the state, presenting them through relentless propaganda as responsible for Germany's economic and cultural decline, basing his propaganda on white supremacist white theory. Hitler was able to use it along with other populist positions to increase support of the Nazi Party. Hitler and the Nazis hated the Jewish people because they thought Jews were responsible for Germany's defeat in World War I. That they were responsible for Germany's economic problems with high unemployment, that the Jews were determined to dominate German businesses and culture. Okay? They were responsible for the lack of morality in modern society. The Jews were either too rich and depriving other Germans of wealth, or they were too poor, so likely they were criminals. They were loyal to their religion rather than the German state. They were enemies of Christians, racially inferior to the Aryan nation. Hitler hated Jews and convinced all the other Germans to hate the Jews and proceeded to kill 6 million Jews. All because one man hated the Jews, created all these lies, and convinced all the other German people that they believed these lies, and so they proceeded to do away with the Jewish people. But this wasn't the first time in history that Jews were almost eliminated from the face of the earth. About 2,500 years earlier, the Jewish race came within 1 or 2 days of being totally eliminated. All because one man hated one Jew. Do you remember that story? It is interesting when you compare the story of Hitler and his hate and his lies about the Jewish people and how similar it's going to be with this first time that the Jewish people were almost eliminated. In case you haven't guessed, we're going to be studying in the book of Esther. Now, this Old Testament book does not mention God once. Not once does the book of Esther mention God. Not even does it give a hint of God's existence. But that does not mean that God is not present in this story. That doesn't mean that God is not involved in the story of Esther and the saving of the Jewish race. That doesn't mean that God doesn't have a part in what happens in this bizarre story, and it's really bizarre. We need to understand this idea that just because we do not see God, we do not feel God every day, does not mean that God is not involved in our lives. That God isn't in control of our lives. That God doesn't care about his people. For 60 years now, Christians in America has decreased in every single state. Some people see this decline as evidence of the end of the world is soon. Some experts and scholars say that this is historical trend of the gospel worldwide. The gospel comes and the gospel goes. Some say that God is judging our country for its sins, and there might be some truth to that. You know, in the 50s, I want to say that the Church of Christ was at its heyday, and it was growing in leaps and bounds. I remember in all my travels in the Southeast, you travel in the back roads, and there would be a town. It might be nothing but just a few houses gathered together, but there was always a Church of Christ. Little small congregation, Church of Christ out front. Every town that you would go through. Probably not today. Most of those small congregations are probably gone. We have seen a decrease in churches. Back in the 90s, there used to be, I counted yesterday, there used to be 5, 6, 7 youth rallies in this area. I think Cypress is the only one left, and it might not continue anymore. You know, there's just not the youth involved in church anymore, and so we see this decrease continually. Many of us who are following God feel sometimes overwhelmed at the godless culture that we live in today. Our nation was founded on God. In God we trust was put on our currency to show that we as a country believed in God, that we trusted in God. But we used to be a Christian nation, but few today really believe that. We as Christians, sometimes find it hard to live in a world that seems contrary to everything that we believe in. Our children are taught things at school that contradict our beliefs. The courts make decisions that don't reflect our values. Television, we talked about this last week, shows they're getting raunchier and more graphic all the time. The breakdown of marriage and family in our land is epidemic. We can't hardly let our kids or grandkids spend the night with somebody without worrying about what they're going to be exposed to in these people's homes. More and more Christians have a sense that we are the minority. The culture we live in doesn't share our worldview or our values or our faith in Jesus Christ. That can make us feel useless, sad, overwhelmed, and can make us feel just like giving up on our own faith. But brothers and sisters, this isn't a new thing. This is normal. In 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14, 15, and 16, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with the devil? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? We are the temple of the living God. And we can't forget that. Too many times people feel left out and they want to be friends with the world. Paul is telling us here, we can't be. We need to be separate, and sometimes we might be alone physically, but remember, we are never alone spiritually. We should never give up. We should hold fast to our belief in God. We should continue to run the race to the best of our ability. We should continue to strive for our crown and our goal to our eternal home in heaven. And as we're going to go through Esther, there's only 2 Jews, but they have not given up their faith. Historically, the people of God have almost always been in the minority in their respective countries and cultures. Jesus and his disciples were branded, ostracized, and persecuted. The Roman Christians were persecuted fiercely and killed for their beliefs. And even before Christ came, God's people knew what it was like to live for God in a godless culture. That's what we're going to be studying as we read through the book of Esther. Here are some things that you need to know about the book of Esther. The author is unknown. It is one of the last books written in the Old Testament. One of only 2 books that have a female name, the other one being Ruth. God, again, is never mentioned in this book. But that doesn't mean he isn't present. The entire setting of Esther is ungodliness. Now, this is a map during the time of Darius, about 490 BC. And this is showing the realm of his region, his property, if you will, of what he has conquered. Over here, this is the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and this, of course, is what we refer to as the Holy Land or Israel. This is India. You see here, this is India over here, and this is Africa, with Ethiopia being in this area here. King Darius supported the Jewish people. He supported them during their return from Babylon exile. His decree allowed the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem. Darius's reign was pivotal with the restoration of religious identity in Jerusalem. Now, starting in Esther 1, these events happened in the days of King Ahasuerus. I have it written up there. This is the translated of the old Persian name of Xerxes. And I'm going to say Xerxes instead of the other one because it's easier to talk about. Your Bibles might have the longer one, but it's the same name. I mean, the same person, just a different name. Now, these events happened during his time. Xerxes reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. Xerxes was the son of the ruthless Persian king Darius, who had conquered most of the known world at the time, and that's what this map is showing. Darius, like most of the ancient kings, had a whole harem of wives, and thus he had many children. Xerxes was the chosen son to be the heir to this massive kingdom. At the time of Esther's story, he was about 35 years old, about 483 BC. Xerxes was raised in luxury at the king's palace. He was spoiled. He was conceited and extremely egotistical. He was a typical ancient king. He was not elected by the people. His dad handed him the keys to this vast kingdom. He owned many nations, ruled over people who spoke many languages. He had control over a vast army and had a godlike status over the people that he ruled. In fact, he gave his name stating that he was the King of Kings. He was better than all other kings. Unfortunately, I'm going to give you homework again to read the book of Esther. It's only 10 chapters, and the last chapter is really short, okay? So say 9.5 chapters. But I'm not going to cover everything, read everything in the book of Esther, so I'm going to leave that up to you to read all the little small, especially all the names, but the small details, we're just going to hit the highlights of it. Now, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Xerxes, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants, the army of Persia and the Medes, and the nobles and governors of all the provinces. The king showed off his riches and his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for 180 days. A party for 6 months. That had to be the party of all parties, okay? The king really wanted to show off his wealth and who he was. We're going to start in Esther 1, going verses 6 through 12. And I want to read these verses so you can see just how extravagant this party was. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods. You know how you have these cheap curtain rods? The rods in the palace were made of silver. Okay? And marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver sitting on a mosaic pavement. Okay? And now it explains what this mosaic pavement looked like. It was made of porphyry, not potpourri, but porphyry. Porphyry is a hard rock containing crystal formations, usually with a reddish tint. Okay? So the pavement, this marble mosaic pavement, was porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. That's what they're walking on. The drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of all different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And we saw how much land he owned, so he probably has a big bounty of wine. Verse 8, and drinking was according to this edict. An edict is something the king passes down, and you do not disobey it. The king's edict for this 6-month-long party is there is no compulsion. Compulsion is the act or state of forcing or being forced to do something. Constraint. The king's edict is there is no constraint on this 6-month-long party. You can do whatever you want to do. Okay? That's what kind of party the king is throwing for all these men. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. And we know the desire of men. So you can imagine what kind of 6-month-long party this was, with the free-flowing wine from all over the countryside. Okay? So you get an idea of what kind of party this was. Verse 9, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Xerxes. So the men are having their own big, wild, crazy party, but the queen has taken the women and they're having a party. Doesn't give any instructions on what kind of party this was, but I'm sure it wasn't as wild and crazy as the men's party was that was going on. We don't know. It could have been. Verse 10. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, probably drunk, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, okay, to identify her as the queen, in order to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was very lovely to look at. So the king is wanting to show off his queen, has her wear the crown, because as this wild, crazy party, you can imagine what might happen. But with her crown, that's going to identify her as the queen. And the king is wanting to show her off to all these men. Look at my beautiful wife. Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's demand, delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. You don't say no to the king, and especially a king as wild and crazy and way up there as this king is. You'll read it farther on when you do your homework, that nobody could approach the king unless he pointed at you with his scepter. Then you were allowed to come up to him. Okay? But this king, you don't say no to the king. You usually, if you say no, you end up with your head, in a basket or something. So here's the queen telling the king, no, I'm not coming into your party. Now, I think this is the first act of God's presence in this story, even though he is not mentioned. The writer may or may not have known that this simple act of the queen refusing to go into the king's party is part of God's plan to save his people. It wasn't much, but it gets the ball rolling in the right direction, as we will read. And again, this is my opinion. There's nothing stated that God interacted here. But as we read this story, we're going to see and realize that this event had to happen, that the queen had to refuse to go to the party for everything else to fall into place. So I think God was there. Verse 16, then Memucan. Now Memucan is one of the 7 princes of Persia and Medes, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. He was present when the king received the news that the queen wasn't going to honor the king's invite to his party. Memucan is going to be one of the main characters in the rest of this interesting story in Esther. Verse 16, then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has the queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Xerxes. So the queen refusing to come to the party wasn't just an insult to the king, but to the vast realm of his country, his nation, whatever you want to call it. Okay? For the queen's behavior, verse 17, will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. Since they will say, King Xerxes command Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. Does it remind you of the lies and contempt Hitler raised about the catastrophic effect the Jews were having to the German population? Memucan is saying that this simple act of defiance against the king is going to bring down the whole nation of King Xerxes, because it is going to cause all the women to go against their husbands or rulers. There will be contempt and wrath in plenty. One man is riling up the whole country, just like Hitler riled up the whole country against the Jews. Verse 19, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed. You can't change it. Once this order goes out, you can't change it. That Vashti is never again to come before King Xerxes, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Okay? And this is what I was saying. This has to happen for God's people, the Jews, to be saved. And that's the reason I'm saying that God had a part in this, because it had to happen. Verse 20. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Again, God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. No mention is made of any heavenly interaction or involvement. But as we will see later, this decree that Memucan has presented to the king and that the king has accepted had to happen for the Jews to be saved later. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give away the ending of the book. Okay. But it does, as we will see. This event had to happen. I'm not saying that God caused Queen Vashti to not respond to the king's request to go to his party, And God set in motion Memucan's making this decree so that the queen will be removed and a new queen, better than her, will replace her. These events must occur to save the Jewish race. And I can't believe that these events just happened by chance, by accident. I think you will come to the same conclusion as we study deeper into the book of Esther. Again, read the book so you'll know what is going on, and be ready for next week's lesson. And we're going to do it in sections like this. It's not, a conclusive sermon, if you will, with each chapter, but it's going to build on each other as we go through and we read this. But we need to understand that God works in our lives, even though we might not see it, but not feel it, not sense it, whatever, however you want to look at it. He's always there, watching his people, helping his people, protecting his people. And as we're going to see here, that God, protects his people and they become out victorious in the end, even though he's never mentioned. There's no hint. The only way that you get any hint of Jesus being there is because of the two Jews, one being Esther, and we'll get into that. If there's any way that we can help you today in your walk with Christ, let us know. Let us be there for you. Let us pray for you. We have a lot of our number that are out being sick. Some are in the hospitals. Please pray for them so that that they can get better. If there's anything we can help you today, please let your wishes be known as together we stand and sing.